All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Zamont, and I'm the Programs Coordinator at the Spondylitis Association of America. Thank you for joining us today for our program, Healthy Habits in the Kitchen, plus a live cooking demo with Dr. Melissa Mandala. Even though we're near the end of January, it still counts as a new year, so we wanted to give everyone some support with their nutrition-related New Year's resolutions. And I know I can definitely use some inspiration myself, so I'm looking forward to this program. So let me introduce our guest speaker. Dr. Melissa Mandala is a triple specialist in family medicine, lifestyle medicine, and primary care psychiatry. She completed her family medicine residency as well as her fellowship in lifestyle medicine at Loma Linda University Health. She's in private practice in Newport Beach, California, and sits on the board of directors of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Dr. Mandala is passionate about treating the underlying cause of disease and teaching transformative, healthy lifestyle behaviors. Thank you so much, Dr. Mandala, for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much, Rachel, and the Spondyloarthritis Association of America. It's a pleasure to be here and have you here in my kitchen as we just bring lifestyle to life. So thank you for the warm introduction.
That's wonderful. So glad to be here. So I know you have a PowerPoint presentation to give us an overview of lifestyle medicine. So go ahead and start. We're ready.
Okay, wonderful. So I'll take it away here. And typically I'm doing a variety of these types of presentations, but I wanted to do a combination just so that you can have this moment so you can take notes if you like, you can learn something, because it's all about the what you know and the knowledge, and then the last part will be the actual application. So it's combining both of those, and I think they're the best of both worlds to see how you can live it on a daily basis. So I'm going to just present my screen here, and then the role of lifestyle medicine. So lifestyle medicine is actually a practice that's been around for centuries, meaning we know that our ancestors have really done the basics of how you eat, how you move, how you sleep. That's what keeps us alive. But lifestyle medicine is actually a therapeutic way of healing. It is a way of optimizing our health and actually treating diseases, autoimmune disease, specifically spondyloarthritis. And I know a lot of people here may have bouts of pains and flares and fatigue, things that you may not understand or maybe don't think you can control, and can be very frustrating. But I'm here to just share the background, the science of it, but also to empower you of what you can do on a daily basis. So inflammation is very, very common, not just in the common things such as heart disease, stroke, diabetes, obesity, depression, anxiety. It really covers all the aspects, but it really comes down to also spondyloarthritis, because if you look at inflammation, the actual inflammation happens in the joints. But why do we get inflammation? It's maybe a term that we hear in media or read on magazines, and doctors talk about it, but it's really important to understand how we get inflammation and where does it start. So autoimmune disease, specifically when it comes to the immune system, we want to look up at the risk factors and why we get disease. And so there are fixed factors, and then we call modified fixed factors. So basically things you can control and things you maybe not necessarily can control. And when you look at these risk factors for autoimmune disease, you look at the age. Sometimes just being in with autoimmune disease in your 20s and 30s, you can see these diseases become more apparent, and maybe you might not get diagnosed till maybe your 40s, 50s, and 60s, just because the inflammation can become over time building up into the system, where you actually get symptoms, and then it becomes a daily wear and tear on your body where you're seeking help. But sometimes your symptoms can start very, very early as pregnancy. And that's why you see that picture here, is because when it comes to the immune system, you definitely have the mother actually giving the genetic component to the baby, but also when the mom is eating a certain way, or the mom is stressed out, or maybe the mom is just dealing with, for example, trauma is a big one when I talk about stress, but different ways. If they're not exercising as much, they're going to get gestational diabetes, high blood pressure, but more importantly, they end up getting autoimmune disease. And these things can be tracked into the early as the placenta and the fetus level, and then following them at an earlier stage in life into the late stages of life. So you can actually see the progression of that. And what's important to know is that, yes, there's the pregnancy component. Yes, there's a genetic and age and gender, and maybe your environment. If I don't know where everyone's living right now, I know in Southern California, we're known for pollution. And so you may not control that. But the good news is when you look at the basic things of what we do every day, which I talked about, is your food, your stress level, your sleep, your exercise, and some of the chemicals and toxins found in either substances such as smoking, alcohol, or in the products or the materials you use at home or at work, they can directly affect your immune system and put you in risk of spondyloarthritis. So why is this important? Is because we understand that nutrition is medicine. And I will explain why on the next slide. And nutrition is something that we get our basic minerals from. So a lot of people look at vitamins and in the form of either powder or pills. And you know what? Where did they come from? They actually came from fruits and vegetables. They came from beans, nuts, and seeds. Some of them actually came from the ground itself. And then the ground, along with the sunlight and the rain, comes about to nourish a beautiful plant. And so I always say that's the best source of nutrition, of fiber, basically anti-inflammatory properties in the whole form that you can find. Studies have definitely shown that if you eat more plant-based foods, you're less likely to get all those chronic diseases, less likely to get autoimmune disease, less likely to get gout, pseudogout, specifically spondyloarthritis. And we know that the pro-inflammatory foods, the things that really anger our joints, our gut, is going to be processed foods. And I would say salt, sugar, oil, all that combined are products that actually really pro-inflammatory, we call it pro-inflammation, but actually inflame and accelerate the disease where it can be more damaging. So processed foods is definitely a big factor. Dairy and animal products are one of the factors too. And with those in mind, there's a whole host. And usually dairy can be found is a large category, right? If there's ice cream, there's yogurts, there's different ways of where we find dairy hiding in processed foods, and mainly dairy hides in a lot of packaged foods that we don't even know, such as eggs, and into the processed baked goods. But it's really how you prepare them, and we can talk about that later. And then animal products. So I just help people understand what that means, and that's anything with a creature with eyeballs. That's an animal. That's still an animal. That's if it's on Sierra land. We try to minimize that, and there's actually been the U.S. Health News produced the top diets out there, and it was rated by health professionals, experts, food psychologists, and the plant predominant ones were at the top, I would say 10, and the animal-based products were at the lower aspect of that ranking. So the gut microbiome in spondyloarthritis, why is it important? It's because the gut microbiome is one of the most, I would say, thriving atmospheres in our whole entire body. The GI tract is very, very long, and they have they call it trillions of bacteria. The microbiome, it weighs as heavy as your brain, and it has a balance of the good and bad bacteria. When there is a balance, we call this gut homeostasis. And that balance comes in when you have a healthy amount of fiber and nutrients and antioxidants. When there's dysbiosis, as you can see, there's almost in those pictures down there, you can see all the microbes becoming a bit angry. Sometimes people see it, visualize it as little fires going through your gut and then leaking through and going to talk to the immune system. And the immune system actually starts with the gut because it's one cell layer thin. And that is your safety guard. That is your army living there. And then it's, as you can tell, it's very, very delicate at the same time. So we always want to protect that gut lining. We want to protect the immune system. But once it becomes compromised, which we call dysbiosis, it starts to get inflamed and talk to all the systems. That's why we know with spondyloarthritis, it's not just joint pain, but you have more predisposition for other types of chronic disease. And what can we do? I talked already about the nutrition aspect, and that's really important, but also movement is very, very key. So that's simple, walking, jogging, taking the stairs. A lot of people like to count their steps, or simple stretching and resistance building, meaning strength building. You want to be able to lift even 2 pounds, 5 pounds. Very simple things can really stretch our muscles, decrease the aches and tightness in our joints. We want to be able to do this. We recommend at least 150 minutes per week. And if you think about it, that's not that long if we have 24 hours in our day and we have 7 of those every day, every week. And so if you can spare 150 minutes throughout your week, that's a great start. So with some I say 30 minutes 3 times a week, or you can do 15 minutes every day. So start somewhere. And I think it's all about not just time and management, but creating time where we can enjoy these times, because it's purposeful movement. We don't want to do something that we don't actually love. Like if for example, the nutrition part, I can give you all these recommendations and say, yes, more plants, but if you really don't like, for example, Brussels sprouts, don't start with that. I always say start with something you enjoy first, something you've had before, and listen to your body. When it comes to your gut, your body will tell you what happens in the gut. If you're feeling bloated and joint pain and fatigue, maybe avoid that and give it a break and try something different. So that comes alongside with purposeful movement. I wouldn't go straight to running marathons, but just come first, start with the little bits of pieces, and you'll realize that it becomes and builds a healthy habit. And emotional well-being is also really, really important, because it's the foundation. Once again, I've worked with many, many patients in the hospital setting, in the urgent care setting, in the clinic setting, and I do recommend these lifestyle pillars. But when patients are either overwhelmed, or they're shocked or fearful or anxious, depressed because of their diagnosis, because of stress at work or stress in the home, it's very hard to implement these new ways of eating, new ways of moving. So getting the sense of the core of what we're thinking, how we're perceiving our life is really important to understand. So that's why I say these are nice words that you can maybe relate to and look up about how can I deal with my stress management? How can I be more positive and resilient and have a better, positive, healthy image? And I could throw these words at you and you'll be like, yes, that sounds really, really good. But I want to give you practical tips too. And when it comes to stress management, and really stress management is something that we can perceive a situation like a flight or fright. So it can be a lion or it can be a cute kitten, and it's really how do we step back and be present. And that's what really this positive psychology is just taking a moment to take a deep breath. And so that's one of my actual every day with every patient, that's one of the things we begin and end our encounter with, is take that slow, deep breath, be present in the moment, and allow ourselves to unwind those maybe negative thoughts and dump it in the trash, and then find ways to replace it, substitute. Just like we're substituting unhealthy foods with healthy foods, we're actually substituting unhealthy thoughts that are very destructive and maybe ugly and very, very, I would say, heavy on our souls and spirits into a more positive way. So that's the transformation. Not only I say is there a transformation of our body and what we see and how we feel, but there's a big transformation of how we think, how we perceive ourselves, and that's called our mental health. Stress management, here's some tools. So meditation, gratitude, being thankful, saying those out loud, creating a list of that, creating fun, relaxing ways to find meditation in your present moment, if that's listening to music that you enjoy, praying, affirmations, saying positive things. So these are all great tools. And sleep, we definitely don't want to compromise our sleep. Sleep is something that we tend in a Western society think that it's last place, or we can keep cutting from an 8-hour to a 4-hour just to be more productive. And I really want to encourage you that health really is given to us when we sleep well. We become not only more productive, but we also have less joint pain. We have less fatigue when we have quality sleep, and we want to be able to think clearly and be able to make good decisions. And when we're making food choices, or it's hard when you're so fatigued and so sleepy. How are you gonna cook, right? Simple things. But when you're in pain, you can actually say, well, I'm going to actually protect my sleep. So we want to have a healthy sleep routine. We want to eliminate foods that can be very stimulating, such as high sugary foods, caffeinated foods. All of that combined can really compromise our sleep. If we're worrying all the time, that's going to compromise our sleep. And then if we have a true sleep disorder, so there's actually 40 types of sleep disorders, and sometimes because of snoring or you're having apnea, that could actually compromise and really mess up your night, and it goes into the next day. So sleep, I say 8 hours of sleep when you can, 7 to 8. And if you're a child and younger, those requirements will be different, but at least for our adult population, 7 to 8 hours. Okay, sunshine. Right now in Sunshine, California, we have rain right now. So I know wherever you are, it may be different and during what time of the year, but as much sunshine we can get. There's something about the outdoors that really elevates our mood, that allows us to actually release more of those healthy anti-inflammatory signals. There are studies that forest bathing specifically increases the natural killer cells, and those are the ones that really come in, and that's our army against autoimmune disease. And then, of course, the ecotherapy when it comes to things, not just forest bathing. It could be a beach, it can be a park, wherever you are, just somewhere outside. And that increases vitamin D, helps your mood, really puts you in a moment of peace. And so I just want to end with these ways to remind yourself. There's acronyms that can help you remember. You can take notes or just take a screenshot. But I really like to start with, to help you, is with love. L for love. A lot of love for, a lot of people, we tend to love others very, very easily, but we forget to love ourselves and love our body, love our joints, and appreciate what they can do. If it's simply, oh, I could actually write my name out, I can tie my shoe. What would we be if we didn't have our hands and just even a little bit of ability? We would probably even be in a worse shape and maybe even depressed, but whatever function you may have, I would say embrace it and love it. And then intention. I always think it's important to have an intention, have plans, and have a purpose. When we are overwhelmed, we think of, oh, let's go with the flow. We're just going to take it, and we're just going to end up taking it. And it might be a snowball effect where it's an avalanche, and we're not progressing. We're not getting better. But if we just slow down, think about some ways where we can create plans, if it's a meal plans, or have an intention to be grateful or exercise more, or even take the medications on time. But we have a plan with an intention. We are staying not only on top of what we need to do, but we're getting ahead of the actual disease process itself. We're in the driver's seat. We're feeling empowered because there are ways to heal. And then S, food, we talked about it. A lot of people are foodies, so let's enjoy food, but let's think about healthy ways of eating. E is the environment. So our environment's important. Sometimes like I mentioned, we don't want to have an environment. If you may need to get yourself out of the polluted area just for a little getaway, or you can have an air filter. So when I had there's fires all around me, I needed to get rid of that smoke. So just being cognizant of that. And then S for sleep, stress, and substances, which I already covered. And substances, definitely tobacco is still a very big issue, tobacco of any form. And we don't want to inflame the body, because not only does it hurt when it comes in terms of your lungs, but it also goes into your gut and into your all of the immune system, where it talks to the other organs. And then T, trust and time. So this is probably the one I also emphasize, because it may be hard to get to that point, to maybe trust the process, trust yourself, trust maybe the food that you're deciding to eating, and then knowing that it's going to take time. It takes time to heal. It takes time to adapt new habits and to a lifestyle that will really you'll be proud of. And I think that's what we always encourage, a lifestyle that you love, that's individualized, that you'll be proud of. But you knew, you not only did you try, but you realize, hey, this helps and this heals, and I look different and feel different than I was before. And then why is you. And once again, that's just, once again, we do have our big circle of, it can be friends or family, our healthcare team, and that's such as spondyloarthritis, and that's very, very important. We need to get all our tools, but we also have to know we are at the center of it. We can make those decisions, we can get the support, and we are in charge. And then L is for laughter. Laughter is still going to be medicine, so please enjoy it. It's okay if you make mistakes, it's okay if you may not like how you feel. You will learn, and you might even laugh about it later. And then E is exercise. So exercise is one of those things that we just want to have it in our daily routine. You can find ways to stretch, do squats, whatever you need, but this is just a nice acronym. So that's me. I'm Dr. Lifestyle. That's my clinic, and I'm Dr. Melissa Mandala. As we mentioned earlier, I'll just end with this slide before we go into the demo. And so Dr. Michael Yu, my husband, was here, and he has his own disease. And he fun fact was that I adopted this healthy new lifestyle, but I really did it because I wanted to try it for myself, because I had issues with irritable bowel syndrome. I had mood decision issues with a little bit of anxiety and depression, and I wanted to fix it. And I wanted not only to fix it, but I wanted to make it last for me and see if it will work for my friends and family. So I tried it. My next, I would say, some people say my next victim, but no, my next partner in crime is my husband. And it's because he had his gout and Suda gout and also spondyloarthritis. And I saw how much he suffered. And I saw that, whenever he ate the junk food, it just made him so uncomfortable. So I wanted to try that. And so once I knew it worked for him, I said, come on, let's try it. And we end up just doing this as part of our mission. We didn't want to stop there. We knew if it worked for us and patients around us, we wanted to share it with everyone else. So that's why we started our Dr. Lifestyle Clinic. You can follow us on social media on these handles below. I have my Jumpstart Guide and my Plant-Based Kitchen. This will kind of walk you through all the steps through the Jumpstart Guide with more resources, and the recipes that I have in the book this is actually a bonus. This is not the same recipe in the book. So I'm always coming up with new recipes so that people can find easy ways to cook that is flavorful, and then maybe according to what they grew up with, their ethnic background, or what they may have seen in restaurants, but something yummy, easy, and delicious. So that is a bit about me. So I will move into the fun part. So if you have this in your kitchen, when it comes to healthy eating and setting it up, I just want to slow down a little bit, because this is important. We want to just look at what our fridge has, our pantry has, and think about, even before that, your grocery list. So if you don't have a grocery list, it's good to just start somewhere. You can have a notebook, you can have a piece of paper. Sometimes there's apps there, but instead of thinking, man, I have to dump everything out, and yeah, maybe that's part of the cleaning out process, but you want to also have foods that you can substitute it with. So I always these are my staples in my pantry, and that's usually nuts and seeds and rolled oats, and that's kind of the material or the ingredients I'll be using here. And so these are the fun things, and I would say this is something you can eat on a daily basis, use in almost every savory or sweet recipe, but it's good to have. And I store them in mason jars so you can see them clearly, and they also, the shelf life is pretty decent. You can also freeze these as well if you would like to, but I've had some of these for 3-6 months, and they're just fine. And then you can label them too. Once you get mason jars and these fresh, I would say, nuts and seeds from a local market, and it can be anywhere from simple as Aldi or Sprouts, depending where you live, but the ones that are much cheaper are the ones that are not in like plastic bags, but are the ones that you can buy in bulk form. Costco, I definitely got pecans here. Like, those are still very good for a good bargain. And then we have other necessities for a good way of homemade cooking. And cooking is an essential skill, I would say, that we can pass on for generations to generations. Some people adapt it during quarantine, but you want to have a good food processor. Um, Depending on, this one is about can carry about maybe 13 ounces. You can have something smaller for this recipe too, depending on your pantry and your kitchen space. A good high-speed blender is good as well, and an oven. That's kind of what I started with, is a good oven, a high-speed blender, and a food processor. For this recipe, we'll only need a food processor, and it's nice because the cooking time is really short, probably about 5 minutes of just getting all of this together and putting it in little bowls, and then 5 minutes of actually blending it up and processing it, and then 5 minutes of putting it together. So 15 minutes in total. Very easy, and even better, it has no cook time, meaning you don't have to put it in the oven. You're actually eating all these ingredients raw, which is very nice because you're getting the full amount of antioxidants, and you can actually digest it very nicely. So you're not losing that quality. So here we go, we can begin. We'll start with 1 cup of rolled oats. The rolled oats is really nice because you can make this into an oat flour. A lot of people are always looking, oh, I don't know what flour to get besides white flour. And there's a lot. There's whole wheat flour, there's even lentil flour, but oat flour is very common, and you can actually make it from scratch. It's probably cheaper, and it's definitely cheaper than almond flour. So you can get your almond, or I mean your oats, and put it here in the food processor. So that's 1 cup. And then we're going to use cacao powder. Cacao powder is really fun because it gives the chocolate sensation, really delicious, without the sugar in there. So you want the pure cacao powder. You can use carob powder as well. So that's going to be 3 tablespoons. And then I also use dates. Dates is awesome because this is a natural sweetener in its fullest form. And you can use this. You definitely want to take out the pits, and you're going to use this. If you don't have the full dates, you can find date sugar and date syrup, but those are actually more expensive. The actual date itself is the least expensive and easy to blend. And then I got some of my favorite seeds here is the flax seeds. I'm sorry, the flax seeds are on the other side, but which I can use. This one is the hemp seeds and the chia seeds. So this is a nice blend of omega-3 and fiber. So you're going to take these, and this is 2 tablespoons of each. And then some people like a little bit of vanilla flavor. You can do that too. That's something you could add. You can add 3 to 4 tablespoons. Some people are sensitive to it, so I tend to not use it. You can use maybe maple syrup instead, or just a little less. And then for the moisture, you can just make sure you have a little bowl of water, and you can use 1 tablespoon. So once you put all those ingredients together and you have them in little bowls, you're going to get your food processor. And you like to, when I think about making anything, if it's baking or something I'm going to put in the oven, you always start with your dry ingredients first. So dry ingredients are typically going to be your rolled oats. So we'll start there. And this is really good because this is the base, and you could use this base for anything else, such as pancakes for oat flour, or you can use it for the binding for some of the black bean burgers or spaghetti balls or anything. So oat flour is in most recipes if you're trying to eat healthier. And then I'm going to get the cacao powder here. And then we'll put that on this side. And then the dates, as I mentioned, and then the flax seeds and chia seeds. Voila. And I usually like to have fun of it with this. I usually have music playing in the background. I'm having a little Zoom session with a friend or family, just having this enjoyment, because it's a process of learning, and it can be therapeutic. Just the cook itself, it does not have to be boring one bit. And so this is flax seeds. These are really fun because this is something that is golden. You typically see the darker colored, and they're both good. But I like to put some flax seeds in this recipe when I can. But I wanted to just focus on the ones we have here in this container. But it's just a side note. You could also add flax seeds. You could also add walnuts. And walnuts are a great source of omega-3s. That's why they're shaped like a brain, and that helps me remember that it's good for brain health too. And then you can use sunflower seeds. So any of your favorites, you can put it in. And for the winter, I've just been a big fan of pecans. And so you can choose what you enjoy. You don't ever have to stick to recipes. And I think that's where you can explore. You can start with the foundation of recipes to get inspiration, and then you could substitute. You can't really go wrong with these delicious cacao or balls, chocolate balls, whatever you want to call it. And here, one last thing is pumpkin seeds. Pumpkin seeds are great. So that's extra texture. So here you go. I'm going to share a little bit of that. It smells really, really good. Carrot powder, dates, rolled oats and hemp seeds. And then last thing is, once again, the vanilla on top. And then I'll put the little scoop. So like I said, the dry ingredients first, you can blend that up and then add the last piece, which is the liquid. So I probably would blend this up. You can actually put a little bit of the water if you feel like it's too dry for your liking. So that is the component. Yeah, you would probably blend this for 2 or 5 minutes. Here's an example up close, what it looks like. This is nice. You can see the bits around it. Some people may want it blended a little bit more so they don't see the full oat here, and you can see it. So you can have different ways of getting your preferred texture. And we'll get another plate like this. And when you're done with making those balls, and literally after you wash your hands, beginning, middle, throughout the process, you made your little balls, because if you're sharing this with your family and friends, of course, you want to keep things sanitary. What I do is I actually cook sometimes with nice gloves, and that's okay too. And especially if you have dry hands or sensitive hands, and that's really nice to protect your hands. And I really like to feel my food and feel how it's actually made, because that's part of the enjoyment process. So just for fun, we're gonna get a little bit more of the carrot powder. I'm gonna put it right here on this side, like this. And then we can actually add a little bit of the hemp seeds. I like food to be very appetizing and colorful, because that means you're putting more fiber and more nutrients. So don't be shy with that. I say, if you want to add more, why not? So I'm going to do the last bits of the balls with an extra coating. So you can do this, roll it here. And since everything's already kind of sticky, you can do that nicely. So some people like to have it look completely like chocolate. So that's why I'm rolling it nicely here. So look at this. It looks completely like a yummy flavored chocolate ball, but really there's no dairy in it if people have dairy lactose sensitivity. And I would say about if you look at the statistics, 80% has some type of lactose sensitivity or intolerance, especially in the ethnic groups such as African American, Native American, and Asian American. So that's why I like to have products that are dairy free too. And so look at this. This is beautiful. So instead of powdered sugar, you're using powdered carob powder. You could also use bits of the hemp seeds to sprinkle it on. It makes it really beautiful. Or you can use the some coconut powder, which is really fun, or some coconut bits on top. So that's just an example for the last stage. And really you can put this, voila, in your fridge. I would recommend that's where you store it. A lot of these nuts and seeds, as you can tell, lived in my pantry, so probably will be okay. You can leave it on the counter, but it's best to keep it in the fridge, especially if you have creatures and around, it just preserves it even better. And so that's it. I want to just share, like, this is so simple. You can find many variations of this, but interesting fact is I was at the store, it was one of those health stores, and they were selling 2 of these balls for $5. And that's a lot, right? That's a bit too much for some people's budgets, but you can make this at home and you can spend from all this probably costs about a, probably to start maybe $5, but you can make so many. You can make much more than 2 of these healthy snack balls or breakfast balls. And so I want to encourage you that cooking can be very simple and cost effective and very, very good for your health. And I would love to just leave this time together for questions, because I know that many of you may have some deep questions about nutrition, about lifestyle medicine, and we can go from there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mandala. That was so information packed. Both your presentation and sharing your personal story and the demo, that was all really wonderful. So thank you so much for sharing all of that.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I definitely want to move into some questions that we have here, especially really honing in on some of the foods that reduce inflammation that you mentioned. So you gave a really great rundown of the whole plant-based foods. I'd love to dive a little bit deeper into specific foods and nutrients that are especially good at reducing inflammation in the body. So yeah, if you could just talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, thank you. That's a very important question. One of my favorite questions. It's because, just like people want a prescription for their pain or for their vision, they want a prescription for food, and they try to find what specific food to start with. And I always say start first with your base, which is your leafy greens. Your leafy greens are the biggest component because they have not only the fiber, but they have the folate. They have your B vitamins. Vitamins are good not only for immune health, but also they help avoid the numbness and the tingling that people can get from neuropathy that can be complicated in some of people's symptoms. And the fiber overall just helps, we know that, with your gut, because if you have issues with constipation or diarrhea, that really helps. And that fiber, I keep saying fiber because if you don't forget everything, but fiber is the component that helps that leaky gut go back together. It actually restores the imbalance, and that's what we need in every one of our foods. And so that's what heals the gut. So that's why we start with the leafy greens. When it has the fiber, it has the B vitamins, it has also the folate, and then your iron is found in leafy greens. And some people lack iron more than they know. With people with autoimmune disease, it's not uncommon for people to have anemia. I just saw a patient earlier, she has lupus, and another patient had RA too, and they have anemia because of the immune system. It kind of suppresses everything around else. But if they don't check their iron panel, they don't check their folate and their B12, you'll never know that is something that's lacking, and they're probably lacking it because they're not consuming enough of it through their foods or through a supplement.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I know you mentioned sources of omega-3 fatty acids just now while you were speaking about seeds and nuts. What are some other good sources of that? I know in other programs we spoke about fish as a good source, such as salmon, but if we're talking about a whole plant-based diet, is it really those nuts and seeds that we're talking about?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. And omega-3s can be found in various components. So there's something called ALA, DHA, and EPA, and these are the I would say foundations of omega-3, and those are the ones that you kind of find in the healthy sources of fat. And when I say healthy, some people think fish is healthy versus plant-based, which are nuts and seeds, but there's healthy fats and that's where omega-3 and omega-6 are also found. So we have to balance out. The omega-6 is actually kind of the worst component found in the processed foods, but we want to make sure that we have a good balance of omega-3 and omega-6. So that's a ratio that we actually are always thinking about. And then we also want to be concerned that if you have a balanced way of finding your nuts and seeds, that's great if you can tolerate them. If you can't tolerate them, then you can get them in the form of a supplement or fish. And I would say, there are studies that say, fish, there's some fish that are more pure, that are not having high sources of mercury or dioxin or even the pollutants in our ocean. So we want to, you can consume that if you cannot tolerate the nuts or seeds.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I want to talk about sources of calcium and vitamin D in the diet, especially because those living with spondyloarthritis have to think about always protecting and strengthening the bones, and really keeping the bones strong and trying to stave off some problems like osteoporosis. So what are some good dietary sources of calcium and vitamin D?
Yes, thank you so much. So we'll start with calcium. And calcium, we always want to make sure we're eating enough calcium. And sometimes you can get it. People think from the pill form, and the recommendations are about 1,000 milligrams up to 1,200 milligrams if you have osteoporosis and osteopenia. And there's different milligrams that you can actually ask your doctor or registered dietitian for that exact advice. But the foods that have calcium are, once again, your greens, your beans too. So any kind of bean. So beans can come in the form of lentils, edamame, black beans, red beans, navy beans, white beans. There's a whole family of beans. So beans are easy to remember. So beans, or B for vitamin B, or also your calcium too. Tofu is a good source of calcium too. If you look at that, it came from the edamame, which is another legume, and they jam pack it into either a cube or there's different textures, obviously, but they jam pack it into an amount of calcium that is actually more than, if you look at compare the actual daily value and the milligrams. Tofu has more calcium, and beans have more calcium than actual cow's milk itself or cheese. And so that's why people always get a bit either confused because they think only milk and dairy are the way of getting calcium, but you get lots of it in tofu and beans and leafy greens too.
That's great. And as far as vitamin D, yeah, what's your favorite source of vitamin D?
Yeah, thank you. I almost forgot that one. So vitamin D is something that you not only you get from sunshine, but an interesting fact is if you get mushrooms and put them out in the sun for a couple hours, you can actually boost the amount of vitamin D through them. And so you can get a natural source of vitamin D that way, or you can get fortified plant milk or fortified cereals with extra vitamin D too. And that's where you get your vitamin D. Or you can just get the easy capsule. It's easy, and you can take at least minimum 4,000 units in a day, up to 800 to 1,000 units per day, depending on your levels.
That is such an interesting fact about those mushrooms. Thank you for that little tidbit.
Yeah.
Okay, I also want to talk more about foods that can create inflammation or worsen inflammation in the body. We have a question about corn that just came in. Is corn sometimes considered an inflammatory food, or can it bother some people?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I would say, corn was actually produced a lot different today versus hundreds of years ago. The soil is very, very different. The microbiome in the soil and the bacteria in the soil was much more healthier, and the minerals were much richer. Nowadays, because of all the manufacturing and the GMO and the pesticides, corn unfortunately has been a source of inflammation for some people, not everyone. Like, for example, there have patients who love corn, put it in everything, can have corn tortillas, but there are other people who get some type of reaction or inflammation or sensitivity, and so it's really individualized. I can't say yes or no to that one, but if you notice some reaction, maybe you can take a break from it and try something else to substitute with. But definitely, we see those types of patients too.
That's great advice. Thank you. I also want to talk a little bit about sugar. You definitely had sugar in the foods to avoid category in your presentation, and we always also encourage people to reduce sugar in the diet. What are your thoughts on sugar substitutes like stevia? Are those better, or what do you think?
Yeah, great. So when you go to the grocery, there's tons of sugar substitutes out there, and you can wear from agave to maple syrup to stevia. And I would say the ones that are probably the worst ones are the artificial sugars. That's the worst ones, because they're the ones with extra additives and coloring, such as like Equal or Sweet and Low. Those are the ones that have they have more of these artificial ones that kind of alter, that we call them excited cytotoxins, things that tell your brain that this is extra sweet and satisfying. And those are the things that actually are very pro-inflammatory. But the natural ones from a natural plant, like stevia, maple syrup, I use dates here. Those are very good because we know where they come from. They're pure from a plant. And they're also nice if you have diabetes. They have lower glycemic index as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I also want to touch on how does alcohol fit into the lifestyle medicine model? We often give advice to lower alcohol consumption because it can impair the body's ability to absorb nutrients. And of course, it also may interact with medications. But how does that fit into lifestyle medicine specifically?
Yes, thank you. So with alcohol, you'll see that alcohol, there's different ways of consuming it, right? Based on culture or based on how it's prepared, if it's mixed with sweet. Sometimes it's mixed in a lot of sugary juices, for example, or Coca-Cola. And that's just another way of really doubling the amount of inflammation that you're consuming. So number one, I always say, always look at the sugar content of any alcoholic drink because there's just extra calories, extra sugar. And if you're especially wanting to decrease inflammation or even weight, you want to minimize alcohol as much as you can. Second layer to this question is that we know that the studies out there, you'll look at the Cardiology Association, you'll look at even some of the bigger organizations when it comes to dietary. So for example, the US dietary recommendations, they'll say 1 to 2 glasses for maybe even up to 2 for men and maybe 1 for women per day is considered safe and tolerable. But I would say, that's good for if you're thinking about that amount. But I would say over time, I've worked with so many patients who have been drinking alcohol for years, and that 1 or 2 turns into 3 or 5. And it becomes a habit that they are unaware that they've been consuming not only more than they wanted to, but for years and years and years. And that amount can still be damaging to our gut, to our liver, to autoimmune disease. And really, the studies are showing that alcohol in itself can still be pro-inflammatory. And I would say there's a lot of people who can't really tolerate alcohol because it's not the safest for their gut. And so I say kind of know yourself, understand your symptoms, and might as well explore, try to see if you take a break on it, what happens. If you feel better, hey, that's a good way of getting your healing rather than having to be on an extra medication. You never know what can happen.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for explaining all that. We just got a request to just clarify, backing up to the sugar substitutes with stevia. One of our constituents feels like she has some dizziness when she eats it. And I know it's very individualized because diet, there's not one size fits all. But do you recommend stevia along the same lines as like maple syrup or honey, or is that kind of in a lower tier of sugar substitutes in your mind?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. With these when I say there's the artificial, but there's the manufactured, anything processed or manufactured will have a risk for these weird symptoms. Some people feel like their sugars are dropping too high, or they get dizziness, or they have bloating. And so a better substitute would always be actually the fruit itself. Fruit has the best natural sugar and it's safe. Please don't be confused if people say, yeah, you can't eat fruit if you have diabetes, or you can't eat fruit if you have autoimmune disease. Fruits are very, very safe because they have all the, like I said, fiber, and it's a complex carb. We don't want to be scared of all carbs. We understand that fruit is a complex carb attached to other nutrients. The simple carbs, which are the carbs that people are saying, oh, we want to avoid and minimize, are the ones like bread and pasta. And those are like and I think about white. So anything white bread, white pasta, white rice. So kind of those are the things that I'm talking about. Simple carbs versus complex carbs. And so this whole nutrition topic is really fun, as you can tell. So I could probably go on and on, but I'll stop there and you can ask me the next question.
Sounds good. Yes, we're just going to keep on with all these questions. So another a common item that we hear a lot about in conversations about anti-inflammatory eating is turmeric. And we've seen so many options for taking turmeric. You know, liquid shots, turmeric capsules, fresh grated turmeric, the powdered kind. What's your favorite kind of mode of getting turmeric, and what does it do in the body?
Yes, thank you. So my favorite mode is, you probably heard the name of the game, is the actual product itself, which is the turmeric root. I have a turmeric root growing over there. It's not the best during the winter, but it looks like a ginger if you've never seen it before. And it's a little bit more orange, and you can actually use that. You can cut up and slice it. You can freeze it. You can mince it. You can boil it with tea. But if you truly need the powder form for your spices, for your curries, or for any of your dishes, the powder form is the next component that you can put in almost every dish. And it's a little, yes, a little bitter, so you always want to kind of counter it with something else to kind of cover it up if you don't like that bitter taste. So be aware of that. But there is also once you put it in the powder forms, they put it into the juices forms, which is fine, but always know what you're buying, because if it's pre-made, there's a likelihood that there's more sugar. But if you make it from scratch, then you know exactly how much you're putting of these other types of ingredients. And if you want to add a little sweetener, at least you know for yourself. And then the pill form, which is the supplement form, that's also very good too. And you can use that. And I always like to say, looking at the synergistic, meaning the doubling and increasing power of the actual turmeric can be multiplied when you put some black peppers. You can either do that when you're cooking, or you can do that when you look at the label.
Very good. That's very interesting. Thank you. Um, I want to talk about an issue that's specific to those living with spondyloarthritis. Many people have, as you mentioned earlier, co-occurring gastrointestinal issues such as IBD, inflammatory bowel disease. Um, and I know that some parts of a plant-based diet might be difficult for somebody with IBD, such as digesting those raw leafy greens and raw vegetables. So how would you advise somebody with IBD to follow a plant-based diet that won't irritate their gut?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, a lot of times patients have both issues with joints and then their gut itself. And so when it comes to raw vegetables, I always say try cooking them first. First of all, is either like boiling them or roasting them, finding ways where you can process it down a little bit, meaning you're actually helping to soften it up, so that it can be more gentle for your gut. So that's one way. And some people are more sensitive to beans and nuts and seeds. So I do the same thing, maybe soak them for a couple hours or overnight. And that can actually help your gut absorb the nutrients a lot better. So that's one thing. And then we also want to know, you asked the questions about lectins, and is that pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory? Does that help symptoms or not? And I would say the most important thing is to understand what's happening in your gut first. So what's the root cause? Trying to see if there's already dysbiosis and inflammation there, and if there's other sources that are triggering it, not just the food. Because when someone advertises one thing, like this one turmeric is going to solve everything, usually it's just not that one turmeric that's going to help all of your autoimmune disease and all your pain. Or if they say this one type of nutrient, if it's iron or lectin, they say that's the one nutrient you need to solve your issues. And it does not work like that when it comes to health or autoimmune disease or nutrition. Nutrition is always going to be paired and coupled with other types of nutrients. So isolating it and taking things apart is not necessarily the solution, but actually understanding why things are happening. So that's when you work closely with your rheumatologist or gastroenterologist or registered dietitian. I also do lifestyle medicine consults, and I approach all these angles and making sure we're not missing anything.
That's fascinating. Yeah, the interconnectedness of all the aspects. And I do want to mention another dietary aspect that along these lines, people often wonder, should they go gluten-free? And it can be very individualized, but what are your recommendations about going gluten-free to try to reduce inflammation?
Yes, I know gluten-free is, before gluten-free was unheard of, or kind of in the closet, and it was hard because you couldn't find things, and it was maybe a little bit more expensive. But now more and more people are adopting gluten-free diets, even plant-based diets. But I would say always get an actual official medical evaluation, because you don't want to assume that you have any gluten intolerance or gluten sensitivity, because you may need that gluten, meaning you might, gluten is found in healthy foods that we eat, like such as grains, and we don't want to limit ourselves. So I always say get an official test for gluten sensitivity. Usually it's done in the form of a blood test. So a celiac disease specifically, and there's TDG and IgA. There's a whole panel that you can actually get. And then if there comes to the point where it's still unclear, you may want to see an allergist specialist too. They have different ways of really seeing if you have a gluten sensitivity. And there's different ones. There's like the blood test. There's also patch tests to see if you have allergies, not specific to gluten, but to anything else. But I always say these tests are they're good tools. But they're not always 100% accurate too. So if you are still having some symptoms and you may want to trial it out, you can, but definitely only with the guidance with an experienced registered dietitian, especially with a physician too that kind of understands. And I know maybe not all physicians may have these types of conversation about food and medicine. And so finding someone that can actually be a little bit more open and work with you on that, so that you know when you can minimize either some of your medications, or when you're doing something drastic in your life, you always want to tell your doctor.
That's great advice. Yes, definitely always partnering with your care professional to make sure that you're on the right track and getting the best advice possible for you. One of our constituents said that she is on a lectin-free diet. This is something that I've heard of just vaguely. As I understand it, lectins are proteins found in legumes and grains that may cause digestive issues in some people. Have you heard of this diet? What are your thoughts on it? And our constituent is wondering if, being on a lectin-free diet, are there any holes in her nutrition plan that she would have to make up for in other ways?
Yeah, very specific, important question. It is a hot topic. It is a debatable, controversial topic, to be honest, and we'll hear both sides and all sides. But I would say, like I said, if you are going on any lectin-free, dairy-free, or even what we talked about, gluten-free, any type of elimination, we got to make sure that you're truly allergic to it, you truly have that problem before trying. And I just encourage you to just ask that, because we sometimes try things and we really want to help our health self and our solve things, and we may not know all the aspects around it. And sometimes there are holes, because if you're not eating legumes, you're missing out on a lot of the B vitamins. That's a huge family of foods that you're not able to eat. And I always like to see there are ways you could definitely work around it, just like people who are truly gluten-free or lectin-free. There are other foods you can do to supplement that and make sure that you're getting a balanced source of nutrition. But you want to also know that these foods can also be maybe healing, and maybe it's not forever, right? Too, that's a big thing. Some people I have patients who try 10 different diets, and they kind of go back and forth, and their flares go up and down, or their weight goes like a yo-yo up and down. And we do know for plant-based nutrition, it's basically the type of eating and nutrition that's more, I would say, not just sustainable because people have adapted from the blue zones, but more so it's something that's steady. It's steady. Like there's the keto diet there. They were ranked top 8 for it's basically for weight loss, but for nutrition and inflammation, it makes things so much worse. So you have to be very, very careful too. So I would say just kind of understand that there's tons of resources and tools and ways to understand your health, and the fact that you're already in the know of nutrition, that's a great first step. But always double check, always ask for second, third opinions if you need to. Look at the resources and the books, and you have definitely professionals that can guide you.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm glad you just mentioned the keto diet, because we do have a question from another one of our members who said that he tried the plant-based lifestyle for many years. It caused gastrointestinal distress for him. So he switched to the Mediterranean keto diet, and he felt relief that way. So I guess this really does emphasize the fact that diet is not one size fits all. But what do you think of the keto diet as something on the other end of the scale that may help some people in the community?
Yeah, thank you. And I like to just look at not only the studies, but even the US news health rankings, and the top 10. Like, we know that the Mediterranean diet was number one. Actually, it's because it was actually known to be followed a little bit easier for patients. Maybe it's easier to adapt and easier to actually follow through, and there's a little bit of more options. That's, for some people, that's may think. The DASH diet actually rated number 2, and the DASH diet basically was first created to stop high blood pressure, and also known to be more plant-based. It was originally plant-based, but then they added fish into that. And to answer your question about the keto component, and people get that instant relief, I would say, because keto diets were originally known to treat severe epilepsy, because when they have high amounts of animal products, it gets converted to ketones that go throughout your body, go into your brain, and treat the seizures. And so those ketones are anti-inflammatory, and so that's why people get either quick relief from some of their pains and ailments, maybe some maybe autoimmune disease, some maybe even weight loss. But I would say over time, the cholesterol found in animal products and the processed foods and the processed meats out there, those are the things that are actually can be damaging in other systems, such as heart disease and stroke and cancer. And that's well known. And that's the problem, I would say, with the keto diet, is because it's not, even though it may be get some relief, we don't know long-term studies 50 years, 100 years down the line, what that will do to the body.
Wonderful, fascinating. Thank you so much.
You're
Okay,
welcome.
I just want to squeeze in one last question here
Sure.
before we go. So maintaining a healthy weight can really help those living with spondyloarthritis, since we know that extra weight can put more stress and pressure on the joints and the bones. So if somebody is trying to lose weight, what type of diet may be best that also fights inflammation? We have constituents who've tried Weight Watchers, who've tried intermittent fasting. What are your opinions on some of these types of diets?
Yeah, great question. I think Weight Watchers also ranked pretty high, just because it's more balanced diet in a realm where the calories were like a little counted in a certain way, a little bit more restricted. And so they're eating smaller amounts, which is automatically going to be good. They're eliminating processed foods. That's very amazing. And so you're going to get good results when it comes to weight loss and your immune system. But I would say you definitely want to kind of see what fits your lifestyle. A lot of people who follow diets in general fall off because they're either very intense, or people just get tired of the way that they're eating, or they get more symptoms. So that's why I always say a gradual modification of adding healthy foods, where your plate looks a little bit differently, and you're experiencing with more plant predominant foods, can really help the body over a lifetime. And whatever you can feel, not only feel good, but also look good on labs, that's probably the diet that's going to work for you.
Excellent, definitely. Yep, feeling good for life, making sure your labs are good, making sure you feel good and healthy. That's what it's all about.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we've come to the end of our hour, so thank you so much, Dr. Mandala, for sharing all of your expertise and wisdom with us. This has been a really wonderful program.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Rachel. And thank you all for your time watching, in your community. Continue to support each other. We're in it together, and we continue to share each other's stories. So thank you for allowing me to share my kitchen and this recipe with you.
Absolutely. All right, you can all find more resources on diet and nutrition if you go to spondylitis.org, and you can always reach out to us anytime with questions. We're happy to help. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.